17 years. That's how long I had worn the badge of husband. How long I had believed in the solidity of our marriage. I wasn't naive. Marriage had its fights, its silences, its phases where the passion faded and then reignited. But betrayal? That word never crossed my mind when I looked at her. She was my wife, the mother of my children, the person who had stood by me through the grind of mortgages, long work hours, sickness, and family drama. Until the night I stumbled across the message. It wasn't even meant for me. A missent text, a little bubble on her phone that lit up as she was in the shower. A man's name I didn't recognize. A line that read, "I miss those nights. Do you?" My blood went cold. I told myself it had to be a mistake. But curiosity, or maybe instinct, pushed me deeper. I scrolled. My hands shook as if I were holding fire. And there it was, in digital black and white. Years of half-hidden meetings, careful lies woven between our routines, and a confession that she had once thought about leaving me, but stayed. For 17 years, I had lived in a marriage with a ghost between us. A man whose name I now knew. A man who had shared her body, her secrets, while I sat across the dinner table oblivious. That night something broke in me. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. Instead, I went quiet. I let her come out of the shower, humming some tune as if our lives were ordinary. She smiled, kissed me, and talked about what to cook tomorrow. I stared at her, memorizing every detail, the way water dripped from her hair, the curve of her shoulders, wondering how many times she had looked like this before walking out to him. I didn't confront her, not yet, because the betrayal carved out something ugly in me. The desire not just for truth, but for revenge. And in that silence, in that simmering storm inside me, the seed of my plan took root. If she could betray me and walk back into my arms like nothing happened, then I would show her what betrayal looked like when it wasn't hidden, when it wasn't silent, when it was done on purpose, on full display. With no apologies, I was going to cheat, and I was going to make sure she knew. For 2 days, I moved through the house like a ghost with a purpose I couldn't name. I kept my routine coffee at 6, dropped the kids at school, long shift at the plant, go home, sleep. But everything was filtered through one lens now. The knowledge that the woman I had trusted had been carrying someone else inside her private hours. People asked me if I was okay. My boss said I looked like I hadn't slept. My buddies joked about divorce, beers, and getting back out there. I nodded to them all, gave them the answers they wanted. "I'll be fine," with a smile that was practiced and flat. But inside, I was not fine. I was tallying. I was counting moments she'd taken from me as if they were bills waiting to be settled. I started to imagine all kinds of revenge. The internet is generous with fantasies. Hack her accounts, post messages on social media, tell everyone, show up at his job, or worse. The more I imagined, the less satisfying it felt. Those options were loud and messy. I wanted something that cut cleaner and left a message in the bone. And in the silence, a plan formed, not elegant, but simple. If she had been able to betray me quietly, I thought, maybe I should respond with a betrayal that was anything but quiet. Not an act of cruelty for cruelty's sake, but a mirror. I wanted her to feel not only the breach, but the exposure. I wanted to wake something in her, the way she had woken something in me. So I began to look for someone. Not a deep plot twist or a tragic affair of passion. I wanted a face that would be an undeniable contrast to the one she'd chosen when she needed warmth outside our marriage. Someone younger, perhaps. Someone who would shock her with how obvious it was. A person who would be there, plainly, publicly, so there would be no hiding in later excuses. I combed the edge of my life for reasons and opportunities. Tinder, too on the nose. Bars, too cliche. I wanted something that felt like fate and a choice both. I wanted a deliberate sliver of theater. That week, my guilt and anger did not let me sleep. I found myself watching her from across the room, how she laughed at the TV, how she folded laundry, how she traced the pattern on the rug with the pad of her thumb. I cataloged every little mannerism like a man mapping a shipwreck. I prayed she would slip up and say something about him. She didn't. At night, I walked the neighborhood, letting my feet carry me. The autumn air had that sharp, honest bite to it that made thoughts seem clear. I remembered a line I'd once read, "Revenge is a confession." I kept turning it over. Was I confessing something to myself, or confessing to her what she had already done? My children noticed the silence. My daughter asked me one night if I was okay and slid beside me on the couch, hands small in mine. "Daddy?" she asked, with the kind of bluntness only children have. "Are you sad because of Mommy?" I didn't answer her with the truth. I wrapped my arms around her and said, "Sometimes parents get sad, but we're okay." Her trust soothed me more than anything else. It reminded me that whatever I did, there were innocents around me, and I owed them steadiness. That made the weight of my plan heavier, but the plan was set. I would not announce it. I would not scream it into existence. I would craft something quiet but visible done in front of her, like a wound exposed in daylight. And because I'm not cruel by nature, I told myself this was not about breaking her, but about resetting us. If she saw me looking away, perhaps she'd understand the depth of what she'd done. Perhaps it would end in fighting, perhaps in collapse, perhaps even if I dared to hope repair. Whatever it was, it would be witnessed. That was the point. Finding her wasn't hard. She found me, if I'm honest. It happened at the corner coffee shop on a Tuesday, an accidental alignment of tired schedules. I'd been in there once before, early, nursing a black coffee and a stack of bills. She worked the counter with an easy smile, bright eyes, and a laugh that seemed too big for the tiny morning rituals of a barista. She was maybe 22. She had a face that had not yet accumulated stories. Her name tag read Maya. I told myself it was purely practical, someone to talk with in long, heavy nights. I told myself I'd keep it controlled. I told myself I would be honest about my intent, a brief clinical diversion. She asked me what I did. I answered with the brief version of my life maintenance supervisor, kids, mortgage. She nodded like she knew about the practicalities of adult life. She made a joke about my beard, and I laughed, a real laugh for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a casual rhythm, not because of shared secrets or declarations, but because I needed the small warmth of being seen by someone not steeped in the history that hemmed me in. She was the opposite of my wife's lover, no secret. No guilty calls at night, just daylight and coffee. I brought her pastries to the shop sometimes, and she recommended music I'd never heard. It felt innocuous, and yet it buzzed like a fault line. One evening, exhausted and fed up, I asked the question I knew I should not ask, the one that coiled at my ribs like a snake. "Do you ever want more than what you have?" I said. We were closing the shop together, the lights dimmed, the last sticky cups were scraped into a trash bin. She paused, wiping a counter, then said thoughtfully, "Sometimes, but I don't know what more looks like for me. Maybe it's less noise. Maybe it's more time. What about you?" We talked for an hour. She had no special motives. She liked her family, her friends, and she had plans. A community college course, a roommate, small dreams. She was not wild or reckless. She was just young and alive. That combination was disorienting and, for my dark purpose, perfect. The night I crossed the line, it was not dramatic. We sat in her little car after a late shift, wrapped in a silence that felt heavy. I remember the tremor in my hands like a man holding a live wire. I told myself, or maybe I said it aloud, that this was about showing her the mirror of what she had done. That if she saw me plainly with someone obvious, she would understand. She kissed me like someone with the softest, most tentative curiosity. I kissed back with the cruelty of a man who wanted to feel something other than pain. I remember thinking then that the first time you hurt someone intentionally, you feel monstrous, as if your own skin had betrayed your intent. It tasted like iron and cheap cigarettes and forgiveness owed. We didn't do it in secret. The next day I arranged to meet my wife for an errand in the town center. My heart clattered like a loose engine. I brought Maya with me. We walked into the market and stood by the fountain under sun that felt obscene. My wife saw us. They say revenge is a mirror, but mirrors can be blinding. When she looked at us, two figures so plainly juxtaposed, her face flushed the color of raw dough. She took in Maya's new haircut, the bright jacket, the obvious affection in the way we stood a little too close. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply looked like someone who had been shown a photograph of herself, and the photograph had a caption that read, "The truth." She turned and walked away. That was the point. I needed her to know without the lie being hidden. I wanted the shame of discovery to be public and sharp as a blade. It felt, in a perverse way, righteous. But it also felt ugly. When you display pain, you unload responsibility into the air. People see it and assume narrative. They invent motives. They make you into a villain or a martyr, whichever fits their appetite. Friends watched from coffee shops later and sent cautious texts, some supportive, some scolding. My wife's eyes avoided me for days, then focused on me with a furious kind of precision that hurt more than any words could. It didn't play out like the movies. There was no cathartic confrontation where she screamed and I repented and everything dismantled in a single release. Instead, we lived with the damage for a long, grinding season. She stopped speaking to me most evenings. Dinner became a choreography of silence. The kids noticed the frost and asked innocent, blunt questions that I fumbled through. Maya disappeared from the shop, citing a move to help her mother. She called once, an apologetic, soft thing, then not again. She was not the villain nor a savior. She was a catalyst. She had been an element in my experiment and then gone, like a sudden storm passing through an artificial landscape, leaving its marks but not a footprint. In the cold quiet afterward, the weight of what I'd done pressed in with an unbearable clarity. I had wanted exposure. I had achieved it. And what I felt was not triumph, but a slow, nauseous sorrow. My actions had been designed as justice, but tasted like revenge. And the difference was a moral contour I hadn't foreseen. One night, months after the fountain scene, my wife woke me. She sat on the edge of the bed, hair tangled, eyes red from tears she'd been holding back like a dam. "Why?" she said, voice small and raw. "Why did you do that? Why did you use someone else to punish me?" I could not hide behind obstinance. I told her the truth, almost all of it. I left out nothing that mattered. The discovery, the hollow rage, the meticulous decision to mirror her betrayal. Her face hardened, then softened in a contradictory way. Rage and something else that looked like grief. "You could have told me," she whispered finally. "We could have talked. I know I was a coward. I stayed. I lied. I told myself the family mattered more than truth. But you," she stopped and swallowed, "you chose the easy theater. You made it public. You humiliated me." She flung the duvet aside and paced the room. "Do you know how many nights I lay awake, thinking about how to make it right? How to be better?" I was ashamed. I told myself I would repair it in time. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." There was a moment where we both sat, the two of us like strangers who had once shared a life. The children slept in other rooms. The house seemed to be holding its breath. "I hurt you," she said finally, utterly honest in the way only broken people can be. "I am not denying that. I don't expect to be forgiven for what I did. But I want to try." Something in me softened, not because of her apology, but because of the way pain looked on a human face. Not the theatrical pain of a scene staged for sympathy, but the quiet, private kind that dissolves you on the inside. We started to talk. Not about excusing betrayal, not about erasing consequences, but about the mechanics of trust and how it breaks. We talked about our marriage with brutal honesty, how we had stopped meeting each other's needs, how small resentments had grown into secret lives. We spoke of the long-term loneliness that had crept in disguised as routine. We admitted culpability, both of us. It took months of therapy, confessions that left us raw, and promises that felt fragile as spun glass. We established rules, full transparency on phones, agreed counseling, weekly dates with no devices, and an honest account of where the marriage had gone wrong. The foundation we tried to rebuild was unmistakably secondhand, but we were deliberate about the carpentry. Through all of this, I learned something essential. Revenge can feel like power at the moment, but the real work of saving something, if saving is even possible, requires humility and endurance. It requires sitting in rooms with someone who has disappointed you and deciding over and over to stay or to leave with dignity. It requires the courage to admit where you went wrong. We did not become perfect. We failed at small things. We stumbled over old wounds when life got stressful. But we returned to the table and to the therapist. And slowly, so slowly, the edges dulled. The anger gave up some space for empathy, not because I magically forgave everything, but because the person across from me became less an enemy and more a complicated human. At some point, we both realized that the theater of revenge had taught us nothing we couldn't learn from truth. The damage was still there, a scar line, but so was the possibility of something steadier. We agreed, one small night by the sink while washing dishes together, like two people rebuilding a wall brick by brick, that we would never do that to each other again. Not the hidden affairs, not the public humiliations. We promised that, if temptation came, we'd talk. If fear came, we'd call the therapist. The promise sounded naive, but promises are practice, not magic. We were not naive about the past. We simply refused to let it be where our story ended. Forgiveness is not a switch. It's not something you flip once and call it done. It's a choice you make every morning when you wake up beside the person who once cut you open. After our late-night conversation, the house felt different. Not lighter, not healed, but suspended, like the air before a storm. We were trying, but every glance was an experiment. Every word we spoke was an audition for trust. I kept finding ghosts. The scent of her perfume would trigger a memory of her getting ready for him. A song on the radio reminded me of the weeks when she had been smiling at someone else. Even the way she folded towels carried echoes of betrayal. She had her ghosts too. Whenever my phone buzzed, I saw her tense. Her eyes flicked across the screen as if expecting another young face. Another reminder that I had paraded my revenge right in front of her. We were both haunted, and the house became a museum of silent specters. The children sensed it. Our daughter asked why we no longer laughed at the dinner table. Our son grew quiet, too quiet, like a boy afraid of stepping into cracks. That more than anything forced us to sit down one evening and admit the obvious. If we kept letting ghosts run our home, we'd lose more than each other, we'd lose the family. So we wrote rules. Ridiculous rules at first. No phones in the bedroom, no disappearing without notice, no silent treatment longer than 12 hours. It felt childish. But childish things are sometimes the foundations of adult survival. And slowly the ghost grew weaker. Not gone, just quieter. You'd think infidelity is a private war. It isn't. It spills out into the world like ink into water. Friends noticed. Some chose sides without ever asking us what really happened. Her closest friend told her she was insane for staying with me. My buddy at work slapped me on the back and said, "Good for you, showing her what it feels like." Neither of them knew a damn thing about the reality. The worst were the whispers in our neighborhood. People love stories of ruined marriages. They consume them like free wine. At the grocery store, I felt stares. At church, I overheard muttering. One afternoon, my wife came home in tears after a woman she barely knew called her shameless. That's when I realized the real revenge wasn't between her and me anymore. It was between us and the world. If we wanted to survive, we had to build a wall against other people's judgments. We stopped telling anyone the details. When people asked, we gave the same answer. We're working on it. Thank you. That was it. No more explanations. No more fuel for gossip. It was us against the noise, and strangely, that united us. But peace never lasts without tests. 6 months after our fragile truce, temptation came for me again. Not in the form of Maya. She was long gone, but in the form of opportunity. A younger coworker laughed at my jokes too often, leaned in too close during a shift. The old voice in my head whispered, "You could do it again. You could feel powerful again." I didn't, but I thought about it, and the fact that I thought about it made me sick. That night, I told my wife the truth, not as a confession of action, but of weakness. I told her I had wanted it, even if I didn't take it. I expected her to explode, to accuse, to scream. Instead, she just stared at me for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you for not lying." It broke me, because in that moment I realized the thing she craved wasn't perfection. It was honesty, even ugly honesty. We still fought, of course. There were nights we raised our voices until the kids hid in their rooms. There were days I thought, we can't survive this. We're too broken. But each time after the anger cooled, we came back to the table. And that strangely felt like progress. It happened one rainy Friday night. I came home late from work, exhausted, dripping wet, and there she was, my wife, already dressed up. Not for me, I thought at first. Her hair was done, makeup subtle but sharp. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, the kind she used to wear when she wanted to turn heads. For a moment, the old suspicion rose in me like bile. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked at me, lips pressed tight, and said, "I was waiting for you. Sit." Dinner was already laid out. Candles, wine, soft music humming from her phone. I hadn't seen her do this since the early days of our marriage. I sat, wary. Halfway through the meal, she finally spoke. "Do you think I don't get tempted too?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. "I've had chances. Men who wanted me. Men younger. Kinder. After what we did to each other, do you think I didn't consider it?" The words struck like a hammer. For the first time, I realized the battlefield wasn't one-sided. I wasn't the only soldier fighting shadows. "But I didn't," she said firmly, "because I decided no matter what, I wasn't going to break us again. Not after 17 years, not after the children, not after everything." Silence fell heavy, broken only by the patter of rain. I looked at her across the table, really looked. For the first time in years, I didn't see the woman who had betrayed me. I saw the woman who had chosen me again and again, even when it hurt. And I thought, maybe it's my turn to choose her, fully. The following weeks were different. We stopped pretending the past never happened. Instead, we used it like a scar, visible, ugly, but proof that the wound had healed. We went to counseling. At first, it was brutal. Talking to a stranger about how I had paraded another woman in front of my wife, how she had whispered love to another man, While sharing my bed, it ripped us open again. But the counselor pushed us deeper. We dug into the why. Why had she cheated? Because she felt invisible. Why had I retaliated? Because I wanted her to feel the same pain. Why did we both fall so far? Because we had stopped speaking the truth to each other years before the betrayals ever happened. One day after a particularly raw session, we walked out into the parking lot, both silent. Then she grabbed my hand, not gently, not romantically, but firmly, like an anchor. "Promise me something," she said. "What?" "Promise me that next time, because there will always be temptations, frustrations, disappointments, promise me that we talk before we break." I swallowed hard, then nodded. "Only if you promise the same." She smiled, small and weary, but it was real. Deal. And for the first time, the word didn't feel fragile. It felt binding. Years later, when I look back on that storm in our marriage, I don't see it as the end. I see it as the fire that burned away the lies. We never became perfect. We still argue, still slam doors sometimes. But the difference is, we always come back to the table. Always. No more silence, no more secrets. The kids grew up and left the house. When they visit now, they laugh and say, "You two act like teenagers." They don't know the battlefield we crawled across to get here. They don't need to. Sometimes late at night, my wife will rest her head on my chest and whisper, "Thank you for staying." And I'll whisper back, "Thank you for choosing me again." Because that's what marriage turned out to be, not a fairy tale, not an endless honeymoon, but a choice. Every day, to stay, to forgive, to rebuild. And after everything, I can honestly say, I don't regret forgiving her. I don't regret being forgiven. We are stronger not because we never broke, but because we broke and decided to heal together.